Greetings, everyone. I am Dethea, the Chief Correspondent at the CollaborativeU TV, where we collaborate to educate, empower, and uplift the community through the lens of some of our nation's greatest thought leaders. Oh my goodness. And today, buckle up, put your seatbelts on, because I have some amazing thought leaders in the house. And we're talking reparations versus responsibility, a conversation that the Black community has to have. So let me welcome to the room, let me welcome to the broadcast, Erica Courtenay-Mann. She's the founder and uber nerd behind the social media management company TalkativeMedia. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is an
You're
important
welcome.
conversation, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And then, I'm gonna save someone for last. Let me go to Phillip. Phillip, an award-winning founder of the Black Business Focus Group and CEO of To the Table. Welcome to the conversation, Phillip.
Thank you so much for having me today, Dethea. I'm so excited about this topic. It's so very important to our community. Let's get started.
Absolutely, I'm ready to dive in. And last but not least, I saved the one I know the longest for last. But Trent T. Daniel, an American businessman, speaker, radio host, corporate trainer, and co-owner of Free Rolls Entertainment. But I'm gonna call him a serialpreneur and an amazing thinker. Welcome to the conversation, Trent T. Daniel.
Hey guys, how are you? It's great to see everybody, and this is an important discussion. I'm looking forward to being a part of it.
Awesome. So I'm going to start off with a Wall Street Journal article that I read by Jacob Schlesinger. It's called "Reparations to Black Americans for Slavery Gaining New Attention." It looks like the House is, for the first time, and this is a June report. Don't know if it's still valid, but this is what they're reporting for the first time, is looking into opening a commission to study compensation for slavery and long-time discrimination. Wow. First time. 400 years.
Well, HR 40 has been reintroduced. It's been there for a while, but I think right now, given the kind of perfect storm of social issues, it is really now on the table because we can see the consequences of not having did everything that we could do after Reconstruction to make sure that Black Americans were whole.
Absolutely. So I know that each one of you kind of has a side, right? You picked a side to be on, either reparations versus responsibility. And so let's jump into it. Phillip, with this new reintroduction, as Erica mentioned, give us your take on this reparations and how you feel as a Black American, as a Black male who's currently under attack, that we haven't really been given our due, and we're still seemingly being punished for being who we are.
Right. Thank you for that question. First of all, I want to thank you for being here again. I want to talk about the title of this show, their reparations versus our responsibility. And I kind of want to play around with that. I think it's our responsibility to pursue reparations. I think it's our responsibility to pursue restorative justice for our community. And if you start with just today and take a look at our current condition today, where the Black community is constantly underemployed in comparison to the white community. The wealth gap is wide and ever widening between the Black community and the white community. The average white family has $171,000 in wealth in comparison to just $17,000 for the average Black family. And so when you take a look back from our current condition, take a look at all the legislative actions, all the executive actions, all the way back to slavery. That's how we arrived at where we are today. And so we have to come up with some form of recompense, some form of way to address these systemic issues that produced our current condition. And it can no longer just be pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We continue to do that at twice the rate as our counterparts. We have to have specific legislative action in order to address the historic wrongs that have been done to our community.
Absolutely. And Erica, I know you can weigh in on that, but I really want to bring Trent into the conversation because you have a unique, you're on the other side of it, the responsibility side of it. So take that same question and give me your response.
Okay, and I saw Phillip smile when you said that. So the ultimate position I have is this. I've never had a problem with reparations. I've never been anti-reparations. But I also understand that I don't think people clearly understand what reparations mean and what reparations should be, okay? Financial, basically, in the Black community, we always come in last when it comes to financial acuity. And at the end of the day, what I envision and what I don't want to see is a situation very similar to what was presented on Dave Chappelle's show when he did the comedy skit about, when all Black people got these $1 million checks and, they go blow the money and they spend it. So, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a true theme, in our community should reparations happen. But I think that responsibility certainly is the key to it. But the responsibility is more of this: where's the money going to go and who's going to administrate it? Okay. I do not believe that Black people should just get big cash settlements and cash payments. I think that would be one of the worst things in the world for us, because at the end of the day, look at what happens to lottery winners who are not mentally prepared to receive large amounts of money and wealth. They typically blow through it in a very short amount of time, and they're in a much worse position than they were. And I just think this happens en masse across the country. So ultimately, my issue would be is that I think that the key to a proper reparations program would be one very similar, which was just voted on recently, where it's more goes into housing, educational awareness institutions, and possibilities set up for the masses as opposed to just large cash payments.
Okay. And Eric, I'm coming to you, but I want to just throw this out there because I totally agree that before we're available, before we're ready for reparations, we have to be ready. And so our responsibility is the education of the individuals who are to receive these things. I think we're not doing enough in our communities with those who have money to get those that are in our communities to a place where they can receive properly. I mean, we saw that with the stimulus checks. 1,200 came in, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, they got rich because we bought TVs, we bought those kind of things. And I don't mean everybody, but the majority who are the impoverished, they didn't know what to do with that funding. And so, Erica, I'm gonna flip that question over to you.
Okay, so let me just say that the stimulus checks did what it was supposed to do because they knew that people were going to throw it back into the economy. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic society, and our spending habits, our lack of financial literacy, they bank on that and they make money from that. So whereas though we will have some of us in our community who will save for a rainy day because maybe they've had the education, they've had the exposure. We have a lot of people in our community who are living hand to mouth. They are surviving and they haven't been taught how to thrive yet. And so we, the thought leaders, or we, the people who are grassroots activists or serialpreneurs, we have to get into the community and we have to be the voice of reason or maybe the voice of support, because we can't really punitively kind of criticize our community for a lack of education when we live in an apartheid when it comes to information, when it comes to education, when it comes to resources. So it's a very fine line that we have to walk. And I'm not fence sitting. I'm definitely for reparations. I also share the thought that there should be a responsibility. Now, whereas though I'm for cash payments, I think it should be supplemented with mental health services, free education, housing stipends, and then maybe there could be some type of quantifiable tenet to receiving your reparations to make sure it goes for the betterment of your quality of life.
Now that is really you put a voice to a lot of the things that I've had in my head about this, because we do have to systematically have a system to roll these type of things out. But let's go to the responsibility part, because I think Phillip really opened my eyes to someone who saw a problem and figured out how he could largely impact it. But even in him trying to impact it through the Black Focus Group, me being a member, I see that there's still a disparity and there's still a lot of just rifts even within a group that is focused on the right thing. Why do we think that's the case? Anyone can chime in on that. Why do we think that's the case?
Yeah, let me address some of that because I think that, we also have to take a historical look at our community. When we came to America, we came here from many different tribes, many different sectarian groups, many different regions, and we were forced into what I call the real melting pot of America. And we were forced to work together under some very tough conditions. We were treated differently. You can take a look at our panel today. We're all different shades and varieties of Black people that came from those people. And so you have a condition that was set back in the early days of slavery that still perpetuates itself today. So we still have some of that legacy behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. And what Erica said is part of the solution. We have to have some mental health to help heal some of that. I want to stay on this topic, but I want to address something that Trent said. He conjured up the Dave Chappelle show, image where we think about, you give Black people reparations, that money's going back into the economy. Well, if you give Black people reparations, you also have to give us the messaging of why we're receiving these reparations. Once I know that I'm receiving restorative justice payments, it's not something I'm going to treat to support the greater economy. This is something we're going to use to build on that hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors. And so one more thing I'll say to that is that, reparations is pretty much an inheritance for the Black community. And, when our white brothers and sisters, receive their inheritance, we don't go out and say that they're going to go and blow it and spend it in the streets. We don't have that expectation of our white brothers and sisters. So why do we have that same expectation of ourselves? So we have to change the way that we think about ourselves.
Well, the reason we have, and I can't necessarily have an expectation, but, there was a lot of truth to what Dave Chappelle did. Now, the systemic root of that truth is the fact it's financial illiteracy, okay? The bottom line, Dave Chappelle was making a joke, but he was making a joke about something that's very real. And see, here's the deal, Phillip. I understand what you're saying, but you think differently, okay? I think differently. Those of us here, we think differently, okay? We actually do care about the historic context to those cash payments. I personally know is that I would love a cash payment for me because I know what to do with it, okay? But at the end of the day, what we have historically seen is that, and it's not just Black people, if you give people who are not prepared mentally a lot of money, who are not prepared to receive a lot of money, and you give them a lot of money, statistically speaking, you're going to find that those people are going to end up worse off than they were, because on top of the mental anguish of having blown all their money, now they've actually got a chance to see what it's like not to have money and to be in the position to buy what they want or do what they want to do. And then they're in the position where they can't do it anymore. So there becomes even more of a mental issue that comes from that. So I'm not one of those people that I've given up on my people. I don't believe that we are the least common denominator. But at the end of the day, I also know that while Phillip, you would take that money and use it based on the historical construct of what your forefathers and your grandparents went through, let's be honest with it. How many of our friends do we know that would do the same thing?
But Trent shouldn't stop us from pursuing reparations. That thought alone, I think, is what's slowing down the process of us moving closer to larger support for reparations, is because we think that people are going to blow this money. I happen to believe that, once Black people receive restorative justice payments, we're going to do something totally different than what folks expect of us. So I think that we should remove that as a barrier.
And I also, to interject, I think that we have been conditioned to think that our community is going to blow a large cash payment. And the reason why we've been conditioned is through media and through the fact that the system of white supremacy teaches that we as Black Americans are inferior in the management of resources. But if you read a book like From Here to Equality by Dr. William Darity and his wife, Kristen Mullen, you will realize that when it comes to Black economic well-being in the United States, white supremacy has had intergenerational interruptions in us actually having access to wealth and to resources. So even when we get financial literacy, even when we get the education, even when we do everything right, there are interrupters who stop us from building wealth. So we can see cash reparations with a greater system to manage the reparations as a way to start to reverse that type of intergenerational interruption that we are so accustomed to.
Absolutely. And let me set this stage because I was raised in the hood. But my mother she sent me to River Oaks Elementary. She sent me to Lanier Middle School. I went to high school for the health professions. I had 1 year where I went to school in my neighborhood, culture shock, total culture shock. But then I went to Prairie View and got a chance to see Black people in a different light.
That's true.
Because previously, my vision of Black people was either the River Oaks Black people who had mothers and fathers who were doctors and lawyers, and they didn't want me, or the hood that thought I spoke like white people, so they didn't want me. But it wasn't until I went to Prairie View and I was exposed to Black people from all over the nation that I recognized there is a different look. And I think part of the problem is that many of the inner city Black people don't have a view that there are different Black people out there, that there are people who come from, and I see you shaking your head. I see it, but I even substituted in only Black schools, only, and those kids had never been out of their communities, so the only thing they knew was what they were raised around. And so until we're exposed to a Black president, until we're exposed to athletes and people who are making it out, we don't even see the hope. We don't even see what we could be as a community.
I
chime in, Erica.
Yes, I disagree with that. I grew up in Auburn Gresham. It's what they say is a rough area of Chicago, but it is what it is. I always had Black teachers. I always knew there was a Black intelligentsia. Now, maybe that was down to my parents. Maybe it was down to my uncles telling me their stories about how they went to war, they came back, went to college. I always knew that there were great Black people, and we had Black businesses in our community before they were gutted out. So I always knew that Black people were capable of great things. And I think there has been a dumbing down of America since Reagan. And it's not just Black America, it's all of America. And I think that once we have people like you, Dethea, who can create Black media for us to consume, we'll start to see that we're not these lone nerds out there, that many people in our community they just need us to lift as we climb. And that's what the children need.
I think I'm going to let my conservative hat show here. All right. And here's why. That sounds good, Erica. But at the end of the day, I think this is the systemic problem. We throw this word community around way too much. Okay. Now, what I've grown to understand that a community is not only a collective mindset, but a collective set of actions. Okay. And when we say Black community, unfortunately, I think we try to lump everybody of color in that group. Okay. And let's just be honest, that there is a hierarchy in every class and every racial structure and every economic structure. There's a hierarchy. Unfortunately, in the Black community, we are the only ones that allow the mainstream white media, such as CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, so forth and so on, to tell us who our so-called leaders are. Okay. Because whenever something happens in the Black community, okay, to Black people, you don't see, I'm sorry, whenever something happens in the Jewish community, you don't see CNN telling you who the leader that's going to represent all the Jewish people is. You don't even know who that person is because they're silently working. But the mainstream media has created the Al Sharpton, the Benjamin Crump, the Quan LX here in Houston. They've created this kind of archetype for us to where we don't really even see people who can exemplify the example as leadership. Okay, President Obama was an example of what I would call Black legacy leadership. Okay, doesn't matter that he comes from a background that is mixed and that's diverse. What matters is decision making, consistent decision making over a long period of time got President Obama where he was at. This shooting in Wisconsin is a prime example. What exactly is being protested? Because what the media is saying is the police shot a Black man. Well, what I see when I look at that video is that a Black man had multiple weapons pointed at him and was not even intelligent enough to make the decision to defuse his own situation and comply with the police's orders. It doesn't matter what level of trust that you have in police. Phillip, I know right now, because you have children, you have family, you have a wife, if multiple police officers are pointing a gun at you, just for the very sake of your responsibility to those and yourself, you're going to comply and hopefully allow the court system to do what it does. So I think a lot of times we get too caught up on this word community, okay? And when we do that, we lump ourselves in with people who don't think like we do and they don't want what we want, okay? I know people right now in my family that if you gave them $1 million, they couldn't give a damn about what our grandparents and forefathers went through. They want that Mercedes. They want that Gucci purse. They want that Lexus. So I don't consider those people a part of my community, even though we look the same. And I think that's where we run into a lot of problems when we start using words like the Black community.
Right. And I agree with that, Trent, to an extent. And I want to add in, I want to posit something. Dr. George C. Fraser says that we're not going to be able to save every Black person. So there's just some folks in our community that just don't get it, won't get it, will not change, etc. And so I think that we have to come to that understanding before we even move forward with anything else. Now, to address this, the police shootings and what have you, reparations won't solve that. So we can almost kind of take that off the table. That's a whole separate issue. But I think it speaks to that system of white supremacy, where white supremacy says that, I can shoot a Black man in the back 7 times and not fear that I go to jail. We know
in the car.
Say that again?
With his kids in the car.
With his children in the car. We know that they're well trained enough not to shoot white people under the same conditions. So why is it that we let them off the hook continually when they shoot Black people? As far as our Black leadership, of course, Trent, I agree with you. We shouldn't have to, have CNN or anybody else tell us who is our leader. We are the leaders. We are the people who should be leading our communities. So we shouldn't have to look to Al Sharpton anymore, Jesse Jackson anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but we shouldn't have to all fall in line behind these folks that, that they want us to follow, who also have some flaws, and I'm aware of that. So that's where we kind of lose momentum, especially when it comes to, pursuing reparations. Now, if we did what Trent suggested, communities of action make change. Communities of action make change. So the LGBT community, there you go right there, LGBTQ. All these different people within one community drive change. Obama is in office, and all of a sudden, the LGBT community has rights that, in many cases, the Black community, it took us, folks dying and getting murdered to get. So that community of action, we need to start driving more of that instead of just worrying about what we all think.
Well, so can I just throw this thought in? And I know this is something that I've observed. When we talk about how we've been conditioned in slavery, I think we can still see that play out today. Because those who were in the house, they had it better than those who were outside. And so they, and now those of us who have money have it better than those without. And we tend to just leave them right where they at.
And Trent, I'm going to use the word community. Uh, our community we're never going to be above the factions between colorism and classism. Colorism is an offshoot of white supremacy, and classism is an offshoot of capitalism. We have to, I would say, rise above it, but we also have to navigate it. We have to talk about it. And so, yes, all of those things that were kind of thrust upon us in slavery and Jim Crow, we live in an apartheid. And these are things that we need to talk about honestly and authentically. And then, like Phillip said, we have to make a plan, an action plan, and then we have to implement change. So there's no shame in talking about it. And just to touch on what Trent said, you say that Mr. Blake may not have made good decisions, but Mr. Blake was out there actually breaking up a domestic dispute. He wanted to check on his children. And I think the responsibility is on the police, the law enforcement officers. They should be trained to diffuse a situation. There were 3 children in the back of that car, and they watched their father get shot. And so where we have responsibility and accountability, it falls on both sides.
So, and I don't want us to go because that's
yeah. I'm sorry, I digress.
We're gonna come back to that. I will invite you back to that show, but I want to get back to where I was going because I believe as a community we're in the midst of one of the biggest identity crises that we have ever seen. Period. You mentioned mental health. I think that we are in the midst of, they talk about people in war and how they have, what's the term that they use?
PTSD.
PTSD. I think our community is a community that has PTSD. I truly believe that. And so with that being the case, being in the midst of an identity crisis, being in the midst of PTSD, especially the Black man now, because we're seeing these things happen. What can we as thought leaders in our respective roles start doing to help repair this?
I think we've got to start making increasing awareness about the importance of mental health. One thing I always go back to is, on June 19th, 1865, when, General Gordon Granger read the Emancipation Proclamation, the slaves didn't flee the plantation in large part. They stayed on the plantation. Let's fast forward today. If you tell me that I'm no longer in bondage, I'm getting the hell out, of that plantation, right? And so when we take a look at that one example alone, that tells you that there was some mental stronghold placed on our community that will take generations, to correct and improve. So once we start to share more about our history, increase awareness about the importance of mental health, then we can change sort of our mindsets. Because I agree with what Trent says, we've got to change the way we think and look at things. But that mental stronghold is there. And I'll give you one more example. I love sports. I grew up playing football. Trent, we grew up in Polk County together, so he knows how big football is. A lot of us think that sports is our only way out or our only way up. And we invest all of our time and our energy into that one activity. And we don't expand our minds and we don't educate ourselves. And so we're locked into that plantation mentality, so to speak. And we miss out on opportunities to advance our community. So we have to increase awareness about mental health, and that has to be, one step that we take in our pursuit of reparations.
And I think to on top of that, we also have to be willing to acknowledge our own inefficiencies. Okay, we have to acknowledge our own choice to stay in bondage. I remember the movie Django Unchained, where Jamie Foxx's character, he killed off those slave masters. They were transporting some slaves, and he killed off those transporters, and he opened the cage, and the guys wouldn't even walk out of it. And Phillip, that's exactly what you're talking about. But guys, there's a reason that people don't walk out of this thing, and we have to admit is some of it is just it's comfortable. It's comfortable to be ignorant. It's comfortable to be poor. It's comfortable to not have to be challenged to go farther and farther every day. Phillip, I've seen what you've done with To the Table. I remember when you were first starting that, and you literally had to grind out in the corporate structure, dealing with all those frustrating things that you and I talked about. It was very uncomfortable for you to get your business and your platform to where it is now. Thea, I've known you forever, babe, and it's been very uncomfortable. And what happens, guys, is that I think we get lulled into a sense of comfort, even if we're poor. Okay. I was always uncomfortable being poor, and I've been poor a lot. Okay? I mean, when I came out, I was always an entrepreneur. I could never work for anybody. So when I came out of college, I was always starting businesses and stuff like that, and I was always poor, and it was very uncomfortable. But when you're in a situation where poverty becomes a level of comfort, then you're going to see exactly what we see. And there's also a cultural and a political ignorance. I do not believe that Donald Trump is not worth listening to. I do not believe that conservative values and conservative principles are not worth listening to. And I do not agree with many of them. But because I'm willing to listen, I can find though that silver lining in the cloud. I think the GOP party, I think Republican Party has literally gone off the rails. I think the crazy people and the racists have taken over. But I also can't say that in the Democratic side that the same thing hasn't happened. We've become very liberal party. We've totally distanced ourselves from true education. Phillip, you remember when all this COVID stuff, and I'm going to keep this short, Thea, but you remember when all this COVID stuff started, I was challenging one of the Democratic leaders in one of the counties in Texas. And my question to him was, if COVID is affecting the African American community at a much greater rate than anybody else, where is the Democratic Party? Where are they stepping up and creating initiatives, education programs, finances? Where are these parties? And the only response I got was, well, we're going to vote Trump out of office. Okay. So there's a certain social and political ignorance that we become comfortable with. And I think until we learn to understand that discomfort should be uncomfortable. Okay. Poverty is something that we embrace. Disrespecting our women, killing off each other, black on black crime. As long as these things tend to remain not as repulsive as they should be, or as the four of us would find them, I think that's a much greater problem that we have, which is truly, I think, the biggest interrupter of any progress is that we become comfortable with our own discomfort.
Is that comfort or conditioning, though, Trent?
I think it's comfort because here's the deal, Phillip. I understand conditioning. Okay. My dad was a military officer. He taught myself and my brothers and sisters a certain way. That was conditioning. Now, as an adult, I made decisions that were opposite of what my training from my dad was because I saw that it was best for me. I saw it was a better way. So conditioning is always a part of it, but at some point, your individual choice making responsibility has to override conditioning. Phillip, there are people who come out of prison, they've been in there for 10 and 15 years. What kind of conditioning did they endure? But they still come out and make the different choice not to fall back into recidivism, and they actually start businesses and do things. So I think that we put a little too much, we give conditioning a little too much recognition, and we let that override individual choices.
But
Yeah.
okay, so this is where I want to interject. You are right. I think that growing up poor, I know I was always uncomfortable. I didn't like it. But one thing that my mother used to say is, you can't teach ambition. That's something that has to be deep inside of you. You can't teach drive. And so I think that there are kids in the hood where we need to unlock that. Now, if you don't have the resources and you don't have the thought leaders and you don't have the grassroots activists to do it, then, Trent, I think they slip into that comfortable circle that you're talking about because they haven't been pushed. Like you had a military dad who pushed you, who conditioned you. But if we don't grab those young people and unlock that key to greatness, then they fall into an area of feeling comfortable. Might not get them out.
And I think you hit it on the head. It has to start with the young people.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. When I was in school, my mother thought that it was best for me to go to a school outside of my community.
Mm-hmm.
But in the school outside of my community, I not only had to fight to learn, but I had to fight the racism of my teachers. And so through that, and then classism, and so sometimes what we think is putting our kids in a better situation
Could
technically
be
is
putting
not
them
putting
worse.
them in a better situation. And so we as a community, we're trying to get away from our community. But the truth of the matter is, if we could just influence our community to be better, then we could raise up kids who are healthy and whole in who they are. Because I
Yes.
was told, my conditioning was that River Oaks was where I needed to be,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
River Oaks didn't
Right.
accept me.
Because you were conditioned that a white school was better. But
Absolutely.
I went to school before I went to the greatest high school of the world. Michelle Obama is my high school alumni. My grammar school was full of Black teachers, brilliant Black teachers. I had this one English teacher, Miss Goins. I love her to this day. And she said, words matter. And the words that you use for yourself, they matter. And this was a Black woman that was brilliant. She introduced me to Gwendolyn Brooks. She introduced me to James Baldwin, all of the poets, all of the great Black literature. And that was right there in the hood. So I think you're right there. When we put our resources and that energy, when we make an action plan to put that back in our community, it has a generational effect on our children. Unfortunately, you're right, Trent. We do have some communities where they are comfortable. They don't know how, and they don't have the conditioning to be great. And so, and then now I defer to Phillip. We need people like Phillip to create an action plan so that we can implement how to unlock this greatness and how to make them uncomfortable so that they want more.
Here's my challenge to the Black community is that we have been conditioned to do just that, go into white institutions and give twice the amount of effort as our white counterparts. We do that in education, and we do that in corporate America, and we give them twice the value that they would get from our white counterparts. Work twice as hard in order to get half the reward. How many times have we been told that? So my challenge to the Black community is, yeah, if you go and you work in corporate America, that's good and great. Do that for a short time, but then come back to your community and deposit those same efforts, that same level of energy in building our community, and then watch as things change. I'll give you an example. You talked about the youth, Dethea, and starting at an early age. Over 75% of the Black community is in support of reparations. Used to be only 4% of the white community was in support of reparations. Now it's closer to 20%. So once those older generations start to die off, the younger generations come in, the attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs start to change, and we can start to see our community flourish. But there's a little bit of muscle, and I think this is what Trent wants us to do. This is the piece I want him to talk about more, is for us to start taking our own actions to build our community, to trust one another, and to work together in order to build our community. So that thing that you went through, that Trent and I went through growing up, trying to be twice as good and trying to fit in and be liked, we can stop doing that. And we can start working on building relationships in our community. And that's going to make us a whole lot stronger. And then that'll make us more cohesive in our efforts to pursue reparations as well.
Yeah, and I also think, Phillip, that the key is that, and it's systemic in our community. Again, there's that word, because we have to allow these young guns. We got to let them shine. Okay, we have to let them shine. I know. Let's just use an example of Black radio here in Houston. The Black radio station that was like, I mean, it was historical. I mean, it was the only Black AM talk radio station. It was historical. Martin Luther King was integrated. I mean, it was and I forget the call letters. I know somebody will tell me in a minute, but that Black radio station, to this very day, those call letters, you still see personalities on air that were there in the 60s. Okay, and you see in these institutions such as the business communities, the chambers of commerce, you see the same leadership there that was there 30, 40 years ago. And that's because These old heads who are in power, they don't want to let go of that power. They don't want to groom the young ones. Listen, I own this club. I'm sitting in it right now. I'm literally grooming 3 or 4 of my subordinates and my employees now to take over for me one day. And one of them is my niece and one of them is my daughter. And the reason I'm doing that, because I understand that my ideas will not always be the freshest and the most current and the most technologically advanced. But if I'm afraid to let the young people shine because I don't want to lose power, then it's exactly what's going on with Black Talk Radio in Houston. Black Talk Radio is the most valuable thing that we could ever have, but we've squandered that away because those who are in charge and in power would not bring up the young guns like a communication student from Prairie View who truly had the talent to do it, but I could never get the opportunity. So guess what? I ended up on white radio stations, okay? I ended up in more conservative mainstream media. So this is another thing, is that the older generation in the Black community needs to really sit down and let the young guns step up and shine. And then what gives us our sense of pride is not what we're doing, but what's being done by those who come after us.
So before we comment on that, I just want to say that I'm not an old head. I just want to throw that out. I'm a young gun, okay? No, but I totally agree with you. And I agree with you because I've experienced it. And not just about young and old, because it's not just about an age, but it's also about young thoughts. Being a thinker, a different from what you think, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. The times have changed. I have to admit that I'm not a techie person, but if you want to get in with these times, you're going to have to become a techie person. Mm-hmm. So there are things that, not just about age, but just the sign of the times and the way things are done, that I don't think we're embracing the way that we should.
Right. That has to be something, that starts at an early age, right? Embracing STEM, science, technology, education, right? So I think that a lot of us have to, move away from that old dog mentality of, the old way of doing things and embrace technology. That's how we are going to get out of our current condition. More of us have to, start messing around on the computer a little bit more and understanding how we can reach more and more people. I always say, if we had Facebook back in slavery would have been over a long time ago. I found out you were mad, and we got.
They were not going to let us have Facebook in slavery.
Some kind of way. Right? Because I would have known that more people thought like me and they were uncomfortable with their current condition, and I could have got together with 10, 12 more people and we could have shut that stuff down. So now, I know the reach that social media has. I know that there are people on the other side of the United States that, want to see the Black community succeed at the same rate or better than our brothers and sisters in other communities. So why not embrace this platform? Why not embrace technology to bring us all together, those like-minded folks together, and then move forward? We can't get everybody. Let's get the ones that want to see us progress using technology.
And I want to bring up one more thing that I think you guys will chime in on and really shed some light on. Right now, the 4 of us are talking. Trent, you have your own talk show, but you were willing to come on this one. A lot of times, the biggest problem is that we're not willing to come together. I want to have my following. I want to have my crew. I want to lead my organization. I want to lead my freedom fighting movement. And so your 12 people, y'all doing what y'all doing. Then Kiki has her 3. Then, look at the Black church, prime example. There are 42 churches on 3 corners, but there's still prostitution. There's still drug addiction. There's still all of that in the community. But you preach before your 5. The other one preach before their 20. Then someone has 100.
That's
Instead
true.
of us all coming together and making it a movement. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can do better at coming together.
Maybe we should talk about the fact that we're not a monolith. Start if you start with the fact that we're not a monolith, and then you move forward and say all skin folks ain't your kin folks. Find your group so that you can move forward. I think we really have to be honest about that. Something that really resonates with me is that a lot of times we put on the Black community that if we all just get together, something magical will happen. We're magical, fractionalized or divided. Trent is a guy to behold and listen to. Phillip is a great businessman. I am an entrepreneur and a super mom. We're all great. But like Trent said earlier, sometimes you have to find people who think like you so that you can move ahead and take those actions. We are not a monolith, and I don't believe that we're going to have this kumbaya moment, but I do believe that if we are authentic and we take authentic actions for the betterment of our quality of life, that we can create a bigger circle where we can find commonality, just like all four of us are doing on this talk show right now.
Right.
Well, and Erica, wait 1 second though, Phillip. I agree with you to a point, but then if you look at other communities, they don't seem to have that issue. If you look at the Asian community, they have different rank, file, and system. They don't all necessarily believe, but I guarantee you, they're one sound. You can't come into their community and do whatever you want to. I don't care if Tommy and Lee don't get along. When you come into their community, like your mama said, don't let nobody come against you. And so I'm not saying that we have to be kumbaya, but we do have to recognize that we are the people.
Yes.
Look alike.
Let me support that message. In times of crisis, the Black community comes together like no other. Around George Floyd's murder, I think we all spoke with one voice. Mm-hmm. Many of us spoke with one voice. The example that you provided with the Asian community is very true. They are cohesive, in times, where there aren't crises. I often tell the story about the time where I won a trip from an Asian businesswoman to Florida. And I was showing it to my Asian boss. And she said, wait a minute, what are you doing with my people? What are you doing with my people? You just won a trip of $7,500. That value should have stayed in my community. What are you doing with my people? And there was a very powerful moment. And I looked around the table and nobody responded. White, Hispanic folks didn't respond in my defense. And I can remember thinking, okay, this is how, this community works together. And that's how they're able to, circulate the dollar so well in their community. That's how they have low police shootings in their community. That's how they have, a higher rate of wealth, lower unemployment, is because of that cohesiveness and that attitude, thought, behavior, and belief about their community. And so that's the perfect example of how we should be. And I think that we can be that way. We just have to focus on doing it outside of moments of crisis.
But wouldn't we be that way if we didn't have intergenerational interruptions from white supremacy?
Oh, definitely.
Would we be that way if they had to let Tulsa survive, if they had to let Greenwood survive, wouldn't we be closer to that?
I believe
you're shaking your head. Tell me why.
We can say that all we want to, but guys, we can talk ad nauseum about what's going on, but the reality is it's not about what's going on, it's what's going on now, okay? And let's just be honest, guys. You got to be willing to let some people drown. That's just the bottom line. You have to be willing to let some people drown. And the problem in the Black community is that we are trying to save everybody. The reason you can't go into an Asian community and mess with that community because it's financially not feasible for them to allow that to happen. Okay, we're in our community, in our culture. First of all, you're absolutely right. We're infighting with each other. Now, here's the deal, Thea. This is why I'm willing to do your show, because see, I understand that at this moment I'm contributing value to you. I'm contributing value to myself through this conversation. Okay, but this whole notion of if we would just pull together, guys. Black people are not going to pull together because white folks aren't even pulled together, okay? In the white community, it is have and have nots, pure and simple. You've got white people who are on Obamacare. You've got white people who are suffering the same type of financial turmoils, bad education, bad financial structures, bad health. They're suffering the same thing, but you don't see the Donald Trumps and the Rockefellers of the world sitting around saying, well, can we all white folks pull together? Now you have your fringe groups, your KKK, your skinheads. You have your other groups that are talking about the unification of white people, but that's not what white people are doing as a whole. So what happens in with people of color is that we get into this we thing. Listen, I am the one who had to build this business. I built this business through hard work, dedication, having to pull some hustles and make some moves, okay, not being afraid to jump out there and take some risk and raise money. And oh, well, you don't ever want to be in debt. That's a bunch of crap, guys. But at the end of the day, there is no we. There is no we must work together, because right now, I know this for a fact. Phillip has to think about his wife, his children, and his legacy for that family. That's the first thing that he's required to think about. Now, I also believe that he has to think about his responsibility to God. Other than that, what more can I ask of Phillip? Because if Phillip individually, with his collective family unit, gives 10,000%, Erica, if you individually within your collective family give 10,000%, Thea, myself, if we continue to do that and that dynamic multiplies, there doesn't need to be a we, because the bottom line, right is right. It's not even an equation to it, okay? But I think we get lost because there's so much we. When George Floyd was killed, a lot of noise. But let's really, really investigate, where was the fire? Where was the action? Yes, there's been some changes to some legislation, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's another forgotten headline. And that's really the travesty, is that we have so many great opportunities to start, but because we're focused on the we ultimately cannot organize and create anything that's of substance and that will last.
Three things. Trent pointed out that the white community doesn't have to, form this we coalition. They also don't have the scourges of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, three-fifths compromise. They don't have that to contend with. They have privilege. So all of them collectively have a privilege that they operate under and within. So they don't have to worry about the different activities that we have to worry about. Another thing, with George Floyd, we had to go out and really force people to take a look at, this travesty and how it represented all the travesty. Get the knee off of our neck was actually emblematic of what has happened to us our entire existence here in the United States. So corporate America comes out and they write all of these nice letters, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. The Black community, it would be wise for us to hold each and every one of those Fortune 500 companies that came out with those statements, hold them accountable. Make sure that they come through with the promises that they've made. Don't just say you're going to commit $40 million and then, 10 years later, we learn you only paid out $10 million to some of these Black-owned businesses. Make sure that we hold them accountable for doing their part. And then, I really feel like that whom much is given, much is required. All of us, we have been given the wisdom to see a better future for our community, for Black people. I think we are required not just to provide that future for our families, our children, but we also have a responsibility to build a community. I know you don't believe that one exists right now, but we have a responsibility to bring our community along with us, and we need to hold that as a solemn and sacred responsibility.
But we have to stop getting distracted with things that don't mean anything, okay? And that's the problem, is that we're so distracted with, oh, you can't call a real estate agent, shouldn't call a master bedroom. And I mean, we get so caught up, and I know that's not something that came from us, but we get so caught up on this pacifist. So Phillip, my question to you, how do we hold those corporations responsible? How do you do that?
I think
before you answer, obviously we have to have a part two, because we 5 minutes. 5 minutes. This is an amazing conversation, and I need each one of you to commit with a head nod right now that we will do a part two. Yes. All right. So we're good with that. But I wanna give each one of you a minute on a closing thought. And so, Phillip, if you want to use that closing thought with that question, you can. It's up to you. But I'm going to yield to the young lady from Chicago first.
Yes.
Can you closing
I
thought?
just want to say that reparations is attainable. The betterment and a better quality of life for our community is attainable, and it takes a lot of commitment from us in the community and those who are our allies who want to see us be made whole as Americans.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Which one of y'all? Okay,
I'll go. And I'm going to briefly answer Trent's question, but at the same time, we have to have a part two because that's a much more detailed discussion. You hold each and every one of those companies that came out with statements accountable by going to them and saying, okay, show me the dollars that you have spent with each one of those community or which each one of those commitments you made. And then hold them accountable to that each and every quarter or each and every year until they have met that goal. And then you go beyond that. So I want to talk about that at the next show. But Thea, I really do appreciate this time that you've given us this platform. This is a very important topic. And to the Black community, your audience that's listening, I encourage you all to talk more about reparations with your children, talk more about reparations or restorative justice with your friends, and where possible, talk to your coworkers and your colleagues about it so that they understand why it's important to make America whole. America cannot move forward because it has this huge debt outstanding. And if you know anything about accounting on that balance sheet, if you've got a huge and outstanding debt, it's just holding your company down. So I want to make sure that America does the right thing by its most loyal citizens. Do what you say you are doing on paper on that U.S. Constitution. Own up to your failures as a country and make this country whole by paying restorative justice to the descendants of America's slaves.
Wow. Trent?
Very simple, lead by example. And at the end of the day, I think that's exactly what's happening right here in this conversation. I get branded as that a lot, but I haven't given up on Black people. I don't think that we're a lost group of people and there's no value in what we have to offer. But I think at the end of the day, we are in America, and we have to understand that America is a capitalistic society, and money talks. That's just all there is to it. You can have the greatest mind, you can have the greatest thoughts and everything like that, but at the end of the day, if you don't have anybody to finance that, or you can't finance yourself, it doesn't go very far. This is why media is so powerful, and why I truly think that if there's going to be a collectivism, it should be around ownership of media. Because at the end of the day, most people out there watching Fox News think what they think because Fox News told them to, and CNN told them to, and MSNBC told them to. So the power of media has been proven, but I think the lack of ownership of that is a situation. And I think when we start talking about reparations, let's start talking about that from a context of not big cash payments going out to everyone, but that in the context of where can we create ownership opportunities for media and collective things like that, banking, education, all of those arenas where if we're able to take ownership in that, then there's a much greater effect and a lasting purpose. But I don't think it's a lost cause. I just think that right now things are just very unorganized because there's a lot of distraction.
Absolutely. And I got to wrap it up. Oh my gosh. I'm going to be emailing each and every one of you. We got to get this conversation back on the schedule. You've actually forced me to make a decision. I'm going to bring Black Wall Street News. This is a conversation that's a continual conversation.
Yes.
That can't just be a one-time conversation. So
Right.
There you have it. The rebirth is here. It is what it is. That's where we're going. It is what it, and thank you so much, guys, for joining us on the CollaborativeU TV, where we collaborate, we bring thought leaders together to make you think and to empower you. Thank you guys for joining. Thank the audience for joining. Sorry, no questions today, but we will be back. Have a great day. And we're
Okay,
out.
guys, take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.